And if you can understand how that works, you can do tremendous things for your performance and for your recovery. So what I'm about to tell you will allow you to perform better in all forms of exercise. And it is not commonly known, unfortunately. I'm here to try and change that. You have 3 compartments for increasing or dumping heat in your body. One is your core. We already talked about that. Your core organs, your heart, your lungs, your pancreas, your liver. The core of your body. The other is your periphery, which are obviously your arms and your legs and your feet and your hands. But then there's a third component, which is there are 3 locations on your body that are far better at passing heat out of the body and bringing cool into the body, such that you can heat up or cool your body everywhere very quickly. Those 3 areas are your face, the palms of your hands, and the bottoms of your feet. Now, the skin on your hands and on the bottoms of your feet, and to some extent on your face, are called glabrous skin. That's Glabrous, glabrous skin. And what's special about those areas of your body and the glabrous skin is that the arrangement of vasculature, of blood vessels, capillaries, and arteries that serve those regions is very different than it is elsewhere in your body. Now, this has ancient roots. Typically, if you were another mammal, like a bear or some sort of ape, you would have hair all over your body. Now, we all know some pretty hairy people, or presumably you've heard that there are these hairy people. I know a few excessively hairy people, and Costello's excessively hairy, but he's not a person, obviously. But all mammals have hair on their bodies. Just some people have very light hair or very fine hair. We don't have hair on these glabrous skin regions. Now, of course, you can have beard or facial hair growth, but there's still regions like the cheeks and other areas that maintain this special vasculature. Okay, so technically the hands and feet are real glabrous skin, and the face is not always quite classified as glabrous, but these 3 locations, face, palms of hands, not tops, and bottoms of feet, are very good at dumping heat and bringing in cool. And the reason is there's a rule in vascular biology that blood moves from arteries to capillaries and then to veins and then back to the heart. Okay? So arteries, which are the big ones, obviously, capillaries, which are the little fine ones where oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged, and veins, which then bring blood back to the heart and other tissues, of course. In these 3 regions of your hands, your face, and the bottoms of your feet, we have what are called AVAs. AVAs are a very special pattern of vasculature. AVAs are described in the medical textbooks. You can find them in Gray's Anatomy, not the television show, but the actual Gray's Anatomy textbook, which is a real thing that exists, and in all medical textbooks. Okay? So let's talk about AVAs and what they are and why they allow these 3 regions of the body to heat or cool ourselves more readily. So what are AVAs? AVAs are arteriovenous astomoses. So if you want to look that up, you can just look up AVAs, veins, capillaries, arteries, if you like, but I'll spell it for you. ARTERIO, arteriovenous, VENOUS, arteriovenous anastomoses, ANASTOMOSES, arteriovenous astomoses. Okay, you want to know about arteriovenous astomoses, trust me. And you want to remember that they are in your hands, the bottoms of your feet, and on your face, and in particular on the palms of your hands, not the tops of your hands. Now, before I said blood flows typically from arteries to capillaries to veins and then back to the heart. But AVAs are direct connections between the small arteries and the small veins. They bypass the capillaries to some extent. They are little short vessel segments. They have a big, large inner diameter, and they have this very thick muscular wall. And they get input from what are called adrenergic neurons. They get input from neurons that release norepinephrine and epinephrine. which allows them to contract or dilate. Now, there's some rules of physics that talk about how the radius of a pipe and small changes in the radius of a pipe leads to massive increases in the rate and amount of stuff that can flow through that pipe. Okay, it's a rule of physics that says essentially that the radius is proportional to the amount of stuff that can flow through something to the fourth power. We're not going to make this a physics class, but if you want to look that up, you can. You can just look up how does the radius of a tube or pipe relate to how quickly or how much stuff can flow through it. What you need to know, even if you don't want to know any of the underlying physics, is that these AVAs allow more heat to leave the body more quickly and more cool to enter the body more quickly than other venous, arterial, capillary beds throughout the body. In other words, you can heat up best at the face, the palms, and the bottoms of the feet, and you can cool down best at the face, the palms, and the bottoms of the feet than you can anywhere else on your body. And when I say heat up or cool down, I mean actually heat or cool the core and your brain. Okay? So this is vitally important. I realize we're getting down into the mechanistic weeds here, but you need to know that these three compartments of your body, palms, bottoms of feet, and face, are your best leverage points for manipulating temperature to vastly improve physical performance. Okay. I also want to point out that the work that I'm going to tell you about is not work from my laboratory. It's the work of, as I mentioned, my colleague Craig Heller's laboratory at Stanford. And we're going to have Craig on as a guest to talk more about these discoveries. They are his and his colleagues' discoveries and how you can leverage them. They're building out some amazing technology. I had a conversation with Craig yesterday as a prelude to this episode and to the future conversation with him. So you're getting the very latest on this topic. So what Craig and his colleagues did really illustrates perfectly what these body surfaces can do and why. They were studying overheating in athletes and in military and in construction workers and trying to prevent it. And they did a bunch of experiments. I won't go into all of them now, but what they essentially found was that cooling the palms, palmar cooling, allowed people, athletes, and recreational athletes to run much further, to lift more weight, and to do more sets and reps to a absolutely staggering degree. Let's talk for a second a bit more about why we stop, why we shut off effort when we get too hot. Because in doing so, you'll really understand how and why the best protocols exist for being able to do more work, to be able to exercise longer, and actually to feel good doing it. You actually can make a doubling of your dips, or believe it or not, a tripling or quadrupling or more of your pull-ups fairly straightforward. I mentioned before that when muscle heats up, enzymes start getting disrupted, and ATP in muscles can't work so well, and those muscles can't contract. Let's get a little more specific about that. The enzyme that's involved here is something called pyruvate kinase. You don't need to know about pyruvate kinase, but what you do need to know is that it ends ASE, which means it's an enzyme. And pyruvate kinase is essentially a rate-limiting step. It's a critical step that you can't bypass if you want muscles to contract, and it's very temperature sensitive. Therefore, if you can keep temperature lower, you can do more work per unit time. You can do more pull-ups, and that actually was done by Craig and his colleagues. The pull-ups weren't actually done by Craig. I don't know how many pull-ups Craig can do. I'll ask him next time, both cooled and uncooled, how many pull-ups he can do. But what they essentially did is they brought someone into their laboratory who could do 10 pull-ups on the first set, and they were able to get 10, rest 2 or 3 minutes, get another 10, rest 2 or 3 minutes. And if you've ever tried this, what you find is that you start dropping to 8, 7, 6, etc. Now, the person might not necessarily feel like they're overheating, but the muscle is heating up. Then, with their knowledge that these AVAs, that these portals in the palms are a great way to both heat the body, but also to dump heat from the body, they used a device. and I'll talk about what you can do at home, but a device where they had people hold on to what was essentially a cold tube. Now, this is crucial. The tube can't be so cold that it causes vasoconstriction, because then the cold won't pass from the tube to the hand and to the core. But if it's the right temperature, it's neither too hot nor too cold, that cool from the cold tube passes into the hand, these so-called palmar regions, and then cools the core, and in theory, by lowering body temperature, would allow the person or the athlete to do more work. And indeed, that's what they saw. The actual data, the specific data, showed that subjects could do, at least the subjects they worked with, on their first day with no cooling, about 100 pull-ups across the time frame that they had. Okay, so it might have taken anywhere from 10 to 15 or maybe more sets, depending on how skilled that person was, but in a fixed amount of time. Then they came back and did the cooling. They did it the very next day, which if you've ever trained a muscle the very next day, typically you wouldn't do as well in its training if it took any damage from the previous session, or you at least do as well, but you probably wouldn't do what they then observed, which was they started cooling after every other set. The person would just hold the cold tube, cool down the body after every other set, rest, everything else was kept the same, and they found that they went to 180 pull-ups, which is incredible. It's a near doubling. And by doing this repeatedly over several sessions, over several weeks, they quickly went in the cooling group from a maximum of somewhere between 180 and 200, as I recall, I'm sort of estimating now, to 600 pull-ups in the equivalent amount of time, which is absolutely incredible. They then repeated this in a study on the bench press. And actually, the bench press study was pretty interesting because they actually had a control group that was admittedly taking specific amounts of anabolic steroids. The anabolic steroid was testosterone cypionate, which is essentially testosterone. And indeed, the testosterone cypionate, the steroid group, improved at a rate of about 1% per week. There were differences. And the cooling group basically left all other groups in the dust. It was just remarkable. So cooling the core, I want to be very clear that it's not cooling the muscle. It wasn't about cooling the chest alone or just cooling the palms. It was about allowing cold to pass through the palms because of the unique vasculature that's there, these AVAs, allowed these subjects to do far more work per unit time. And the important thing is that if they were to come back after doing 600 pull-ups or 500 pull-ups, you might say, well, wow, that's going to create a situation where recovery is going to be absolutely impossible. They could come back, not use the cooling, and they still saw a highly significant increase in the amount or the number of pull-ups or dips or bench press weight that they could do. Okay? So what that meant is that it was both an excellent performance and an excellent training stimulus that they were able to recover from. Okay. I don't know if all of you are following this, but these are the sorts of increases in exercise output that are absolutely staggering. And that's why professional teams and the military and others capitalized on them very quickly and use these. Okay. Now, you may be asking, what about endurance, right? Not everyone wants to be able to bench press a lot for multiple reps and sets. And I should just mention for the bench pressing, it was, I believe they found people that could bench press 225. So that's 2 45-pound plates on the 45-pound standard Olympic bar for repetitions of anywhere from 6 to 10. And then they had them do the same thing. They did a set, they'd rest 2 or 3 minutes, sometimes up to 4 minutes, then do another set, repeat. And with cooling, they were able to increase the amount of work, the number of reps with the same weight. Sometimes they did have to increase sets to approximately double